Thank you for joining us for the Human Services Grant Applicant Workshop. This workshop is optional, and we hope we can use this time to answer any questions you have about this grant and the application process. This meeting will be recorded so we can post it on the internet for those who could not attend. Today, we also have a Spanish translator available, Lorena Escobar, the city's housing coordinator. And she's now going to make an announcement that she'll be available to translate questions, and that she and I will be happy to meet with anyone to go through this presentation in Spanish. So Lorena, please go ahead with your announcement.
Hello, my name is Lorena Escobar, the city's housing coordinator. I will be able to translate your questions at the end of the presentation. To ask a question, please click on the small picture at the bottom, a small picture at the hand at the bottom of your screen, or click Q&A and type your question. We will answer all questions at the end of the presentation. We are also available to meet with you separately to go over the entire presentation in Spanish. Thank you very much for your interest in this grant. Now I will go ahead and translate this in Spanish. Hola, mi nombre es Lorena Escobar, coordinadora de vivienda de la ciudad. Estaré disponible para traducir sus preguntas al final de la presentación. Para hacer una pregunta, haga clic en la imagen pequeña de una mano en la parte inferior de la pantalla o haga clic en preguntas y respuestas y escriba su pregunta. Responderemos todas las preguntas al final de la presentación. También estamos disponibles para reunirnos con usted por separado para repasar toda la presentación en español. Muchas gracias por su interés en esta subvención.
Okay, thank you, Lorena. Lorena has gone over the notes on how to participate in the meeting. This is a relatively informal meeting. We are asking that questions be held to the end of the presentation, but after that, it's a small audience. We can take questions however you want to present them. You can either click on that hand or click on Q&A and type in your question. And I'll be able to, quote, allow you to speak. So right now, I can't see your picture. I can only see who's in attendance, a list of who's in attendance, but I'll be able to see a raised hand, and I'll be able to click on you to allow you to speak as an attendee. So I'll now do a quick presentation to go over the basics of the application process and the grant itself, and then we'll take all the time you need to answer questions after that. One second. I forgot to share my screen. Here we go. Okay. Okay. For next year, we are back down to our ordinary amount of funding, which is $500,000 in funding from the city's general fund. The application is on the city's website. You can download it from the sanmarcostx.gov/HS grants page, or if you type in Human Services Grants, you should be able to get into it. The deadline is July 29th at 5 p.m. And we're asking for electronic submission to cdbg@sanmarcostx.gov. So we no longer want to receive paper. Organizations may propose more than one program. You simply need to do a separate application for each. And for example, if you have multiple programs, we only need all the backup documentation for your organization once, and then just do a separate application form and questionnaire for each project that you're proposing. What is a human services agency? To move this down. And therefore, what agencies are eligible? It's any organization that seeks to improve the quality of their clients' lives by providing, facilitating, or recommending support for an array of basic social, physical health, housing, and mental health services to needy clients in a community. And it must be overseen by a volunteer board of directors. So this is our working definition of who is eligible to apply. What expenses are eligible? You can ask for labor, supplies, materials, some equipment to support your program, facility operation and maintenance. You can do lease and phone and internet access, things that make a program happen. What expenses are not eligible? Furnishings and vehicles, not eligible. Fundraising, and then like client incentives, like where you're offering them a bonus to join your organization or whatever, we just wouldn't pay for that. So a complete application form is page 4 and 5 of the application, and we'll go over that in a little bit more detail. There's a questionnaire on page 6 and 7, and then there's a list of items on page 3. It's a checklist, and so we need all of those items that pertain to your organization. And I want to be sure and emphasize that you include a compelling description of your program or project and how it will be measured, the impact it will have, and on whom. That's the most important part of the application. So now we'll take a few minutes to go over the application and questionnaire and checklist specifically, and I will bring that up. Just 1 second. I'm going to have to switch documents. Okay. Okay, here's what the application looks like. It is very much like last year, but I know last year was a radical departure from years prior, and so we'll go over this in just a little bit. Once again, we do not want paper copies. You can either combine your whole application into one PDF, or you can submit various PDFs and just send them all by email to cdbg@sanmarcostx.gov. No late submissions will be accepted, although since we have a firewall, we'll allow a few minutes after 5, but not much after that. A couple of notes regarding funding requirements. We like to emphasize funding has to be spent on the program that's approved, and we will require proof of expenditures as part of your reporting that you submit. We'll require that as part of your payment request. So these first few pages are some requirements for the application. I encourage you to read through them. We'll go into more depth about presentations here in just a bit. Here's the timeline. We'll talk through that. Here's that definition that I've already read about what is a human services agent, and then a direct client and an indirect client, so that you can know what we're looking to measure. Okay, here's page 3, which is your checklist of required attachments. So feel free to ask questions at the end of the presentation about any of these. Please note that a minimum of 3 letters of support from the San Marcos community is required. We had some questions last time about whether they could be from outside the San Marcos community. For example, if you're a new program, especially, and you're just coming into San Marcos. So the answer is yes. We prefer to see them from the San Marcos community, but if you're trying to show what your program can do and somebody in a different community is familiar with it, then yes, we would accept letters of support from them as well as one of your minimum 3. So then here we come into the parts that you're going to submit. This is page 4. So page 4 and 5 are basically the application. They require a brief description of your program and the services for which you're asking funding. And make this page 4, your elevator pitch, basically. What do you want the board members and city council to know about your program? What most do you want them to know about your program? Do include a very specific description of who will benefit from this program and how. And kind of put it in 5th grader language. You know how they talk about that with newspapers. You want it on a level a 5th grader can understand. The people who are reviewing these applications are probably going to review about 40 applications. And so you just want it to be really clear and understandable to somebody who isn't familiar with your program. So page 5. Here we ask you to identify any matching funds that you're going to get or hoping to get. And then some more information about the program. Describe the direct clients, how's the program marketed, etc. And it needs to be signed by the board president. Let me check my notes. Okay, page 6 and 7 are a questionnaire. And this year, we changed the wording on this page. It used to say no more than 75 words per question. And it turned out that's really too little. We've received a few comments that really that was not enough. And so we kind of talked it through and we're like, actually, that should be our minimum, you know. That's a guiding rule. It doesn't have to be 75 words each question, of course, but in general, aim for kind of that level of response. Can be more, can be a little bit less. And this questionnaire goes on for a couple of pages, and this is the other part of what the board is looking at to become more familiar with your organization and the program itself. Try to be as specific as you can be. The application is in Word, so there shouldn't be a maximum on how many words you can use, but do be considerate to the board members who are reviewing 40 of these applications, of course. Okay, now we'll go back to the presentation to describe the process of the presentations that you'll be giving to the board. Let me take this away. Okay. Okay. So you turn in the application before July 29th or on July 29th. And then what? In August, staff will be compiling the applications and getting them to the board to start reviewing. And we'll be doing a board orientation in August as well. So in September, October, and November, each agency will present to the board. There will be about 6 applicants presenting each week. Each one has 5 minutes to do a virtual presentation to the board, plus 5 minutes for questions and answers. And I'll try not to cut people off this year. So when you're answering a question, we'll just keep going until the answer is finished and then we'll stop. But last year I was a little bit draconian on the 5 minutes for Q&A. But in general, it will be held pretty tightly to 5 minutes for each presentation and then 5 minutes for Q&A so that we can kind of roll through the presentations. Please do be assured that the board members take this very seriously and they do review your entire application before you present. A little bit more about the presentations. Presenters will be panelists on a Zoom meeting, and we can send a link to each panelist. So for example, if you have multiple presenters or if you want more than one person to be sort of available for questions, we can send each person a link. Your presentation can include either just simply talking to the board, or you can share your screen and show a presentation. It can go either way, and we've had both, and they're equally effective. The presenters can leave after their 10 minutes. That's normal, I think, because there's not going to be another opportunity for interaction. However, these are public meetings, and so you're welcome to stay and listen as well. So what should be in the presentation? Feel free to repeat information that was in your application, but just know that it's not necessary. Like, you don't have to cover, things exhaustively that are in your application form, because the board does read your application thoroughly and they'll have it in front of them. Be sure you spell out why your organization exists. And then also, it is effective to provide stories of your program in action, or if you're starting a new program, try to give us some examples of similar programs and what they've accomplished. And of course, show or describe what this funding will accomplish, and kind of put it in human terms, like who's going to be served, or what is your mission and how is it going to be accomplished. Okay, now we'll talk just briefly about how applications are evaluated. They are evaluated by the Human Services Board Advisory Board. Staff is here in just sort of help capacity. We put together the applications into a format where, you know, like we just combine everything so that they can have a packet of information. We are present at each meeting and we try to help facilitate the discussion. But the reviewers are actually the Human Services Advisory Board. They use the evaluation criteria that are on page 8 of the application, and they use the risk assessment that is on page 9 of the application. So we'll go into a little bit more detail on those. Okay, we have a new requirement. I need to move this. Sorry, maybe I could minimize it. There you go. Okay. We have a new requirement this year, and this takes the community need and justification up to a maximum of 50 points, which is more than it has been in the past. I do not, however, want anyone to fret about this new requirement because you can imagine, you know, y'all are mostly public service agencies for the most part. You may not meet this requirement. And so everybody may be in the same boat, but here's what it is. So in this first evaluation criteria, we're looking for documentation and justification of the need for the activity, number one. But the new requirement is also proposed projects should address a city council strategic initiative shown on page 10 of your application form, and you'll receive more points for doing so. If your program does not meet a city council strategic initiative, don't fret, because many others will not either. We just needed to put this in as a requirement so that we can emphasize the city council strategic initiatives as being important to the community. So we will give extra points if your agency or the program meets one of those initiatives. Let's see. Yes, so I want you to know you'll still receive points in this category, this community need and justification category. You'll receive points based on your documentation and justification of the need for the activity. You'll receive extra points if you meet a city council strategic initiative. I know this may be a little bit hard to read, but I just wanted to show you what some of the city council strategic initiatives are. Economic development, for example, it could be facilitating opportunities for training and programming for residents. So that's something that your agency may do. Community safety, but in that category is also addressing the factors that cause individuals to become homeless and to assist those experiencing homelessness. So that's just setting it aside as this is a particularly important factor for our community. And then we also have workforce housing as a particularly important issue. For example, housing rehabilitation or eliminating barriers to housing in some way. These are not all of the initiatives. This is just a quick selection that I wanted to show you just to get a flavor for what is out there. But we did include them in the application, so you'll be able to see that on page 10. Okay, going on with the next category of evaluation, impact and cost effectiveness. So 25 points for this one. We're looking at the amount of overhead compared to the impact on the identified need. Implementation costs compared to impact. It's kind of our cost benefit, as you can imagine, ranking for this one. We like to see that you have leveraged resources from other funding sources, and we like to see, of course, that you use volunteers in your program, for example. Implementation, maximum of 15 points. So this is a little bit lower this year, I believe. We're looking to make sure that you seem to have the resources needed to be able to get started on your program relatively quickly, and that you seem to have clearly defined objectives that you are ready to start implementing toward. We'll also look at the past performance on grants funded by Human Services grants. So we'll look back to this current year to see how it's going. And community support, a maximum of 10 points. We want to see 3 to 5 letters of reference that indicate a local support for the program. But as I mentioned, if you're a new program coming in to San Marcos from a different community and you feel like you need to have support from letters that are from outside the community to show what the program is or how it works, that could be okay too. Community support also shows through having volunteers that play a vital role in your organization, or having board members that are actively involved that don't just show up for meetings, but also do fundraising, for example. Okay, an additional level of review that's done is just a quick risk assessment. We look at program complexity, project experience, leveraged funding. All of these things either add to the risk. For example, if your program is complex, it might be riskier that it could fail. That's the question. Your amount of project experience, the leveraged funding that you have available. If you have more funding available, of course, then there's a more likelihood that your program will succeed, et cetera. So that's what is looked at in this risk assessment. It's considered kind of an auxiliary to the evaluation, just to see if an agency is considered high risk, medium risk, or low risk. Okay, and then what? Okay, so first of all, you turn in the application, then you do your presentation to the board. Those will go on in September and October and probably into November. And so then the board recommendation will go to City Council for funding on December 6th. And in December and January, staff will be working with the agencies to create the contracts. It is a little bit more detailed contract than it used to be. It does require quarterly reports where you talk about your beneficiaries and your impact. To the extent feasible, payments will once again be reimbursements. We'll probably have to do that 20% upfront like we did this year. Organizations that were awarded large amounts and were used to getting all the payments in quarterly upfront. For those agencies, we did a 20% upfront so that you could get started. And then we did quarterly payments that were reimbursements. And that's what we're probably going to do this year again. We are emphasizing reimbursements. So, for example, if at all possible for your program to be feasible, we want to do payments as reimbursements instead of upfront. However, if you come to us and you say, you know, I have a program that simply can't run without having the funding upfront, it just doesn't work, then we will set up your agreement to provide for upfront payment. And that agreement also sets up the timeline for your expenditures. Typically, the timeline is 1 year, but it doesn't have to be. That's not a hard and fast requirement. And so we can customize based on your need. Okay, now we'll open the floor for questions. This is my contact information. And I'm gonna, excuse me, have to stop sharing my screen so I can see who's asking questions. But this information is also up on the website as far as my contact information for you to have. Okay, so now I will be looking for hands raised or anything in the Q&A. I don't see anything yet. We'll give everybody just a few minutes because, oh, here we go. Yeah, it just seems like we always need a few minutes and then the questions will start coming in. Have churches applied and received grant monies in the past? And they have actually, because they're a human services organization. Often churches have sort of an arm that does community service. And so yes, specifically, you will be able, I believe, to look on the website and you can scroll down to see who the applicants were last year. And you can see that we did have applicants that were churches, and I believe at least one, if not more, There's two, I believe, that receive grant money for direct services to clients. And I have a question. Can volunteer contribution count as part of the half of total funding needed? Let's see. So what I'm understanding your question to be is, you have seen that the application says we'll fund no more than half the funding needed for the program. So that's a great thing to bring out. I should have mentioned that. So as your other half of funding, you're asking, can we use volunteer contributions? I would say I don't see why not. I think that would be fine as an in-kind service. Yeah. So I think that would be fine. It shows that you have, if you have sort of an established volunteer base, or you are certain that you know you're going to get a certain number of hours, I would think that you could go ahead and submit that as an in-kind on the little budget sheet that shows where your other funding is coming from. Yes. Okay, so when you say that the human services funds can't be more than half the program, does that mean the portion of the program that is delivered in San Marcos, or the entire program? So this brings up a couple of things. One is the funding that we're providing. Let me think how to say this. We want it to serve San Marcos residents. However, the program that you're creating does not have to only serve San Marcos residents. For example, it could be a program that serves all of Hays County. To the extent possible, we want the funding that you are getting from the city of San Marcos just to serve San Marcos residents. In the portion of the program. And I would say, to answer your question, the funding from human services grants can be half of your entire program. So, for example, if you're serving Hays County and you have a bigger program than just the amount that you're asking for from human services grants, the human services grants portion could be all the way up to half of the entire program. I don't see why not. Like, that's how we've been running it. But on the other hand, what we are really looking for, and I hope I'm not just making this confusing, but what we are really looking for, you know, is for the amount of human services funding that you get to go to San Marcos residents. But I can see how, for example, for a Hays County program, San Marcos does have a large portion of the population. Maybe half of the program is going to serve San Marcos residents and the other half is going to be for the rest of Hays County. You could turn in a program like that. I hope that answers your question. So let me know if it doesn't. Okay, and we'll just give a few more minutes for any other questions to bubble up. Okay, well, with that, I think we'll go ahead and close the workshop. I am happy to answer any other questions that come up as you're filling out the application. We really do want this to be a relatively easy process as best as we can. I know it involves a lot of documentation as well, but we sure appreciate you putting together the description of your programs so that we can really see what they do for our community. And so thank you very much for your interest in this grant, and we will be signing off.